Good morning. My name is Katie Peterson, and I'm the Associate Center Director and a Research Fellow with the Public Policy Institute of California's Water Policy Center. Thank you for tuning into our program today, featuring the findings of a new PPIC report, Solar Energy and Groundwater in the San Joaquin Valley, How Policy Alignment Can Support the Regional Economy. I'd like to thank the Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, and the California Strategic Growth Council's Climate Change Research Program with funds from California Climate Investments for their support of this research and today's event. So as many of you may know, for a couple of years now, PPIC's Water Policy Center has been working with numerous partners from the San Joaquin Valley and from across the state to look at solutions to the enormous water challenges that are facing the valley. And this is a region that is home to 4 million people and about 5 million acres of irrigated cropland. It produces over half of the state's agricultural output. And it's also ground zero for California's water challenges, including bringing severely overdrafted groundwater basins into balance, even as we experience more intense drought under our warming climate. In some of our past work, we showed that investing in new water supplies, such as through groundwater recharge, could help fill some of the deficit caused by decades of overpumping. We also showed that new supplies alone won't be enough. Demand management actions will also be necessary, and at least 500,000 acres of cropland might need to come out of irrigated production by the 2040s to secure the region's groundwater for the long term. We're now looking at a variety of options for managing this farmland transition, as we call it, in ways that could be most beneficial for the region's communities, economy, and environment. Today, we're pleased to share the results of a report examining one such alternative, utility-scale solar energy development. This past July, we also shared the results from 2 companion studies on the potential for water-limited agriculture on some of this transitioning farmland, as well as the risk of air quality impacts from dust emissions on fallowed farmland. And stay tuned for further products in January, when we will release new economic modeling results describing potential land fallowing under different scenarios for water treating and adding new supplies. If you're interested in learning more, these reports and the slides from today's presentation are available on the PPIC website. That's ppic.org. And if you want to stay informed on new work related to this project, you can sign up for our mailing list on the website as well. So for our program today, we'll first hear from Annabelle Rosser, who's a co-author on the report, and she'll share some of the highlights with us. Then my colleague Andrew Ayres, research fellow at the Water Policy Center and the lead author on the report, will be moderating a fantastic panel of local experts to talk about the findings, as well as discuss where we can go from here. So a couple of housekeeping items before I start today's program. First, just a reminder that PPIC is a public charity and does not take or support any positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. Now, at the end of today's program, we have set aside some time to answer audience questions. So keep this in mind, and if you have a question for our panelists, please send an email to the address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. Also, please include your name and organization along with your questions so that we can acknowledge you. And now I'd like to welcome my colleague, Annabelle Rosser, to present the key findings from the report. Annabelle?
Thanks so much, Katie. Good morning, everyone. As Katie said, my name's Annabelle Rosser. I'm a co-author on the report and a research associate at the Water Policy Center. Before we get started today, I just want to give a big thank you to the rest of my co-authors, including my colleagues Andrew Ayres, Ellen Hannick, Alvar Scribabo, Darcy Wheelis, Mitchell De Leon, Curtis Seymour, and Abigail Hart for all their contributions to this work. We'd also like to say a big thank you to our over 50 stakeholders, the likes of which included energy planners, county representatives, land managers, solar developers, and other experts from across the state for their participation in the workshops that helped inform this report. With that, we can dive right in. So first and foremost, as we explore alternative land uses for formerly irrigated agricultural land in the San Joaquin Valley, solar is a really promising option. At the crux of our analysis are two coinciding pieces of legislation that are happening in synergy with one another, SGMA and SB 100. SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, requires the state to bring its groundwater basins into balance by 2040. And our previous analysis estimates that this may require taking as much as 500,000 acres of agricultural land out of irrigated production over the next 2 decades. Our estimates are illustrated by groundwater basin in the map on the left in red. At the same time, the region has a really high potential for solar. So almost 3 times as much acreage as may come out of production has a high potential for solar based on TNC's most recent Power of Place study. And these estimates are illustrated in blue in the same map. So along the same time frame, SB 100, the state's standards for renewable energy, requires the state to meet 100% of its 100% renewable energy goal by 2045. Doing so will require an unprecedented build out of renewables, including solar. Think roughly about 70 gigawatts of solar. Make sure I'm actually sharing my slides. Okay, here we go. So like I was saying, the map on the left shows how much we've estimated, how much groundwater might be, how much acres are coming out of production due to SGMA, alongside how many acres we're estimating might be suitable for solar due to TNC's Power of Place study. So along the same time frame, we're expecting a lot of solar to potentially be developed in this region. This could amount to as much as 150,000 acres in the San Joaquin Valley alone. So there's likely significant overlap between where we're estimating some acres may go fallow in the region and where we think there's high suitability for solar in the region. So it's important to note that solar is already an attractive land use in the region. We heard from a variety of stakeholders that solar is often more profitable than some annual crops. In some cases, it can offer 2 to 5 times the return of annual crops based on rental rates. In some cases, it can even exceed orchard crops, although this is less common. One major caveat here is that landowners that are currently participating in solar developments do often reserve their water rights. And we heard that if landowners aren't able to do this, that their interest in solar would likely be reduced. As a result, over 3 gigawatts of solar has already been built in the region, about 15% of what has been built so far statewide, and there's as much as 20 gigawatts in the queue as it stands. Although not all queued projects will necessarily be built, this does signal the industry's interest in building in the valley and a need for further planning in order to bring some of these projects online. And so given the potential benefits to landowners, how can we maximize the benefits to local communities and the environment? 3 things need to happen. First, we need to increase coordination between disparate planning processes. So as it is today, the energy planning and land use planning processes involved in these transitions are often pretty disconnected. At the same time, we also need a local and robust workforce to build all of the solar. And then lastly, we really need to simplify the permitting process to build out solar at the pace and scale required by SB 100. So to better integrate planning efforts, it's important to recognize that where we build solar will have lasting impacts. Projects have about a 30-year lifespan, and it's likely many of these projects will be renewed given the investments made to site them initially. While a variety of factoring considerations inform solar siting decisions, one of the most important is interconnection. As you can see in the map here on the left, most projects that are currently in the queue are concentrated around existing transmission. If projects cannot connect to transmission, they cannot be brought on, they cannot transmit electricity. So this is one of the most important factors when we're thinking about where we build solar. Currently, the state's transmission capacity poses a barrier to development in a couple of ways. First of which, transmission lines don't currently have enough capacity to build out the amount of solar required by SB 100. Secondly, existing energy infrastructure doesn't always reach areas with a high suitability for solar. So in the context of lands coming out of production due to SGMA and us wanting to build solar on these lands, there's a real need for, as counties and GSAs identify areas where they're likely to experience fallowing, linking this information with energy planning efforts so that as those agencies expand transmission, they're doing so where we want to build projects. There's also a need to integrate a variety of other siting considerations like high habitat value so that solar is not necessarily built on lands that are a good option for conservation. So secondly, in addition to the loss of revenues that some landowners and counties may face due to fallowing, fallowing will also result in the loss of some local agricultural jobs. And while the solar industry will not replace those jobs as a one-to-one, there's substantial optimism in the potential for the workforce development that these projects will provide. The scale of solar that was required by SB 100 requires a new solar workforce to move projects forward to construction. And so considering this, existing training and workforce development pipelines will need additional support in order to meet the predicted labor demands. We heard from stakeholders that many of these jobs are already being found locally. Local hiring has been reinforced by a number of factors, including county permitting conditions and union labor agreements. At the same time, one thing we need to consider is that a lot of these jobs are relatively temporary, especially in comparison to agricultural jobs. And so once these solar panels are built, there's not a lot of maintenance necessary. And so a consistent pipeline of new developments is needed in order to provide steady employment. In addition to that, beyond just the construction of new solar, we also heard from stakeholders that these installation jobs can be a really useful springboard into adjacent construction trades, really providing an access point to apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship programs that can lead Valley workers into more stable and lucrative careers long-term. And finally, there's a need to simplify the permitting process if we're going to meet our energy goals and the timeline set out by SB 100. Currently, in order to reach 100% renewable energy by 2045, we need to be building about 4,000 megawatts of solar a year, and we're currently building less than a quarter of that. One of the best ways to expedite projects like this is to develop a programmatic approval process for solar projects that in identifying in promising areas that are meeting certain site characteristics. County and other permitting agencies are some of the actors that can undertake this effort, identifying ag lands that are coming out of production that are the most suitable for solar, and then permitting them programmatically. And this is also a place where project co-benefits can be integrated, including things like water saving, soil health, habitat conservation, and air quality. And finally, who is going to do all of this work? So we've identified a number of actors that can implement some of our recommendations. First, we need energy planners to coordinate with GSAs and counties as they expand transmission. We need federal, state, and local agencies to work together to help simplify some of the permitting processes for land that's identified as a promising place for solar development. To develop our workforce, we have a lot of actors that need to come together, including solar developers, labor unions, community-based organizations, state agencies, counties, and local leaders. And then finally, to help facilitate some of the project co-benefits that I talked about, we'll need solar developers to help identify best practices and state agencies to provide the support needed to make those best practices feasible. So that concludes the presentation portion of our event. If you're interested in learning more, I strongly encourage you to check out our full report. And if you have any questions for the Q&A at the end of this event, please submit your question to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com, and please include your name and organization. Okay, I would now like to welcome my colleague and co-author, Andrew Ayres, a research fellow at the Water Policy Center, to moderate the panel discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Annabelle, for the presentation as well as the introduction. We have a really exciting panel to help us discuss the findings of the report here today. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to do long introductions for these panelists, but their bios can be found on the PPIC event webpage in case you're interested in learning more. First, I'd like to welcome Erica Brand, the Project Manager of Land Use and Infrastructure Policy for the California Energy Commission, onto the panel. Second, we'll have Dan Kim join us. He's Principal and Vice President for Golden State Clean Energy. And in addition to that, we'll have Mayor Rey León, who's the mayor of the city of Huron in the San Joaquin Valley. Ray should join us in just a second here. There he is. And then finally, we'll be joining Lorelei Oviatt, who is the Director for Kern County Planning and Natural Resources. Great to have all of you here today. and I'm looking forward to this discussion of the report and solar power development in the San Joaquin Valley. So we'll start with Lorelei. Can you give a little bit of an introduction into what solar development looks like in Kern and how important it is for the county?
Certainly. Thank you so much for doing this report. Kern County, we're kind of far along in this sphere. So we have 157,000 acres of wind and solar. We've been working on this for over 15 years. Majority of it is in our desert area, but we have it in our valley. So, we are bringing kind of a different idea of where we want to go with solar and these lands. And we are also very far along in our workforce. Our solar projects run 90% local hire because of the things we put together. So what we're interested now is looking at the policies that we believe can help move this faster, as well as working with some of the issues we have with solar developers on property tax revenue.
Excellent. So next we'll go to Rey León. Can you introduce yourself briefly and just talk about what opportunities solar development in the Valley provides for your community?
Good morning, buenos dias, everybody. My name is Rey León, Mayor, City of Huron, and there's opportunities definitely, I think, in employment, but also there's there's good and there's some concerns as well, right? Because we've traditionally been an agricultural region, and acreage that goes out of production is taking out local jobs. And so I think today's discussion would be extremely interesting. And I think we need to just put everything out on the table because we're just beginning this. Even if it's been something on the stovetop for the past couple of decades, I think there's some fine tuning to do to ensure that there's equity. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rey. Dan, next, can you talk a little bit from the perspective of Golden State Clean Energy, what it's been like developing solar power in the San Joaquin?
Thank you, Andrew and PPIC for doing this report. This has been incredibly useful and will, I think, be a foundation document for driving hopefully policy decisions that will continue to increase the development of renewable energy in the Central Valley and create clean energy jobs. The team that I'm involved with Golden State Clean Energy is developing the Westland Solar Park, which has been one of the signature projects in Central Valley for solar, and the development of the project started about a decade ago. So far, we have 250 megawatts online, another 400 megawatts in construction currently, with another 500 megawatts following that. And we're really looking forward to seeing, as Lorelei said, policy changes for really the development of new transmission into the region because of the potential build out opportunity that the region continues to provide California to meet its clean energy goals.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. And last but not least, Erica, can you introduce yourself briefly and then just talk about, from the state's perspective, what the role of the San Joaquin Valley may be in helping to meet renewable energy goals moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Erica, and I'm a project manager at the California Energy Commission, which is the state's primary energy policy and planning agency. And in my role, I'm focused on long-range planning for the resource build to achieve SB 100. And when I use the term resource build, I'm thinking about the suite of generation, energy storage, and transmission investments that may be needed to achieve this goal. So first, thank you. I found the report to be a really helpful summary of the potential alignment and synergies between implementing SB 100 and SGMA. These policies will each drive land use transitions, and what's clear to me from reading the report is it's going to take strategic and collaborative planning at all levels to maximize the benefits to people and the environment. So the San Joaquin Valley, as noted in Annabelle's presentation, the first SC100 report released last year found that we need a significant build out of clean energy generation over the next 25 years. And that amount of new infrastructure will require developing land and ocean areas in many regions of the state, including the San Joaquin Valley. The clean energy transition in the San Joaquin Valley, it really can create an opportunity for significant investments in all scales of clean energy development, from distributed energy resources to utility scale solar energy. And the scale creates opportunity, but as we've heard so far from some of the fellow panelists, we also need to ensure that the pathway to achieving SC100 is affordable, equitable, reliable, and implemented in a way that supports achieving local and state land use priorities.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So we've already heard both from Annabelle about transmission. It's come up a couple times in the opening remarks. I'd like to turn now to Dan briefly. Transmission constraints present significant uncertainty for large-scale solar projects in the Valley. And ultimately, these constraints might make it hard to achieve state energy goals if they're not addressed. What's the process like right now for you at Golden State Clean Energy and more broadly as a developer to get projects connected to the grid, and what changes could help the state meet its expansion targets?
Thank you, Andrew. We at Golden State Clean Energy have been, as I said, developing the Westland Solar Park. And when we first started this project almost a decade ago, the transmission interconnection process was ironically more simpler. But since since the kind of the growth of renewable energy in the Central Valley has increased dramatically, and the interconnection process has become much more time-consuming and costlier. To give you an example, when we first started, it was pretty reasonable to assume that the interconnection process would take about 3 years from beginning to end. And currently, as a result of the overheated queue has been kind of identified by the ISO and many other developers commenting into the interconnection process enhancement workshops, is that the overheated queue has now resulted in a interconnection time frame that is upwards of almost 7 to 8 years. So projects that currently are in the cluster 14 queue, which is over, I believe, 140,000 megawatts in size, are looking at an interconnection date of completion, closer to 2030. So that is going to make meeting the clean energy targets in California challenging, given the difficulty of getting projects online, and that also is commensurate with the needed transmission in the region as a result of the number of projects that we're seeing and the planning assumptions about how much renewable energy is going to be needed. As of last week at the ISO board meeting, the increase of annual renewable energy assumptions went from 4,000 megawatts annually to 6,000 to 7,000 megawatts annually, and that continues to change from one year to another because of California's growth in both the economy as well as the pace of electrification, and that is going to commensurately have a strain on the interconnection timing that I mentioned earlier. So I'll kind of stop there and see if there's any questions you have, Andrew.
No, that's great to get your perspective on that. You mentioned the planning process, and one of the key things that we raise in the report is opportunities for more integration between planning at the local and regional scale for land use and planning at the state energy at the state level for energy system planning. And so I'm wondering, Erica, the state is currently, or the CEC is currently updating the land use screens that are used in statewide energy planning. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what a land use screen is and what that update means and how progress is going?
Yeah, so the California Energy Commission collaborates with the California Public Utilities Commission, CPUC, and the California Independent System Operator, CAL-ISO, if I use those acronyms, on long-term energy planning. So thinking 10 years or more ahead about the generation resources and transmission that may be needed to achieve the state's goals. One of the aspects of that is thinking from a statewide perspective about the land use information that should be used in that type of long-term energy planning. And so for over 10 years, the energy agencies have collaborated together to use spatial or map-based environmental land use data in energy planning, and that became known as land use screening. What land use screening helps us do is understand or estimate the amount of renewable resource potential. So how much solar, how much onshore wind could come from different regions of California, given system performance, topographic, environmental, and other land use constraints. So this planning is done at a core statewide level. And it's important to highlight that land use screening, it's not looking at siting specific projects or planning for where specific generation projects will be located. It's helping us understand at a regional level what might be feasible so that we can use that information to inform long-term energy planning. So right now we have a draft proposal out for comment that includes what we're calling the first phase of updates to these land use screens. And in the first phase, we focused on statewide data related to legally protected areas, biodiversity and habitat data, and cropland data. Data sets that have been used in planning for a while, but we wanted to take a look and see if there was new information at a statewide scale that we could use to update how we consider this information. In the second phase of our work, moving forward, we're going to be focusing on other land use related factors. And one that's come up through our workshops from public participants has been, how are you thinking about future groundwater availability in your evaluation of land use or lands that might be available for solar across the state? So we think that's one important factor that we're going to be looking into. And that really connects with a recommendation that I heard earlier, and one that was made in an interagency report last year, is that we really want to think about how we can improve the framework for how we better integrate statewide electricity planning and local land use planning. So that will be a focus of our work moving forward.
Excellent. Thanks for teeing that up, Erica, and for giving the audience a good understanding of how this information is integrated at the state level. Speaking of local land use planning, I'd like to go to Lorelei right now. Lorelei, landowners in general sort of are concerned about keeping their lands without water in the future productive for themselves and their communities. How can solar help to remonetize land? And how can the county support this? And what are the major land use planning considerations in that?
Well, on behalf of the city of Huron and other local governments, I want to add another layer to this, which is all we have is land to produce the money that keeps our libraries open, that keeps our Meals on Wheels going, that keeps our law enforcement. That's all we have. And when we have the loss of agriculture, as the mayor mentioned, we're not just losing jobs, we're using value-added ag. We're losing the processing plants. We're losing the local hardware store. And so one of the things that we're looking at is this issue of what I'm starting to call value-added solar. So we're starting to look at using those lands for clean energy industries. For example, we're pursuing carbon capture and sequestration. We'll have the first ones in California CARB is looking at 100 million ton projection of what they need to take out of the air. We could use these lands for that kind of solar, for hydrogen, for green concrete. And I'm starting to call that value added solar. Solar itself, we also need to work in our partners in the solar industry and look at the solar tax exclusion that does not allow local government to get the money that we would get from an ag processing plant, for example. And we need to look at providing opportunities to be part of the whole solution. The state has, and the California Energy Commission has an overall context of how we're going to address climate change. But we need to make sure that we're not leaving behind our local property taxes, our local sales tax. Jobs are great, but no one wants to live in a community where we can't provide the services. So we're looking at carbon industries that could use this solar. And that's one of the things that we're very excited about, because we don't need to wait 15 years for transmission upgrades. So we think this could be an interim use for some areas in the valley as we wait for this long-term transmission upgrade to happen. And those are some of the things that we're working on.
Excellent. So bring it down even from the county level to a more local level. Ray, can you please comment on what your experience has been like with solar? Where have there been successes in terms of providing opportunities and benefits for your community, as well as where have been hurdles and where's there room for more progress?
First, let me say that I love clean energy. I was in the Capitol wearing a cap that said 100% a number of years back to help get past SB 100. I've been doing environmental justice and air quality policy and systems change since 2003. But I'm also from the community of Huron, which is one of the, if not the poorest city in the state of California. And it's, this is a farm worker city within the county that has been identified as a county with the highest ag revenue 2 years in a row, and it's never less than the top three. So, 1,000 acres for us means 50 jobs on the farm year round, 200 jobs off the farm. And so 1,000 acres put out of production for 20 years, it's 250 jobs per year. In the calculations that I've done at a minimum wage, which of course it's going to be more than that because some folks get more than that, the loss is, it's pretty high. It's at about $108 million. The loss to the local economy. And I grew up in a family business, a restaurant, Mexican food, and since my childhood. And I know what was going on when we had strong lettuce seasons twice a year, right? The economy was booming in the community of Huron. Main Street was like downtown LA, with buses, with the cars, farm workers coming in from all over, 8,000 migrant farm workers. As a matter of fact, more than doubling the population. Lettuce season is all but dead, right? And now we got a bunch of orchards coming in that are not labor intensive. We got the solar parks coming in, which I think is good, but I think the problem is the missing of the resources that are no longer going to exist, right? In the calculations that I have, and me and Dan have had this conversation, we're working on some stuff together. I'll talk about that in a little bit. In terms of the profit for solar in that 20-year span, in my calculations, it's $871 million. So I'm thinking, if 12% of that gain is what we're losing, there's got to be something that could be done, so that communities like Huron aren't at 100% loss. Right? Workforce, we need to work on that because folks need to transition. Farm labor is not the same, and it's not going to be the same with mechanization and thousands of acres being put out of production, right? We're talking about the new green economy, technology, workforce, upgrading the skills, and getting those folks that are currently on the farm transitioned into solar installation, right? But also it's about quality education. Our high schools and community colleges need to be stimulated to have more resources and provide more opportunities for our kids. We have a 52% dropout rate in my high school here in the Coalinga Huron Unified School District. Our city has been fighting for its own high school because we want a better quality education. We want access to equitable access to a quality education. And there should be STEM in every one of these high schools because these students need to be the folks that are going to be the engineers, the attorneys within this industry, the clean energy industry, renewable technologies industry, right? The managers, the trades workers, those are good jobs. We need to do a transition at different levels of all of this, and we can't expect to have failing schools to continue to perpetuate the poverty in our communities that they've done for the past numerous decades, right? So through the nonprofit that I founded in 2008 and continue to be the executive director of, we are working with our local community college, and we're in talks with Golden State Clean Energy via Dan, who's one of our employer partners. So we're training solar installers. And so we're hoping that we could get at least that portion plugged in, but we still need to work on the education portion. And if this industry is making these hundreds of millions of dollars, there needs to be something of a community benefits package provided to these communities that are really, really feeling the hit, right? Our local economy needs to be empowered, right? And our students and our young adults and our parents need to be ensured a good quality of life with an access to a good job.
Excellent. Thank you, Ray. I'd like to build out that partnership a little bit more and turn to Dan real quick. Dan, Ray was talking about the fact that there are opportunities here, but we need investment in workforce development pipelines to sort of make it happen for the regional economy and local communities. Can you talk a little bit about how your firm is engaged on this front and what benefits that can deliver for those, the local communities I just talked about, but also for future development in the Valley?
So one of the things that we've advocated as a developer of renewable energy in the Central Valley is the notion of master planning. And master planning isn't just the tools that will get a project built, but it's also the investments and the partnerships that begin from really the beginning of the concept of putting a project together, working with city councils, working with local governments, working with the workforce investment boards and the economic development corporations in the counties, working with the CSUs and the UC and the community colleges to identify the type of training and employment opportunities that are necessary for not only a single project, but a whole line of projects that will drive the type of transformation that we're talking about here, because part of everything that you have identified in the PPIC report and what Erica and the CEC have been looking at in terms of land use planning and Lorelei's efforts to create a clean energy industry in Kern County is this need for creating a transformation of the Central Valley from purely just an agrarian economy, which is critical to the continuation of just the life, the history of the Central Valley, because it is going to continue to grow food and fiber, and that's going to be its primary economic engine. But there's a whole subset of future kind of industries and opportunities, for communities and for families and for our children, that are in the region, to be able to see the benefits of clean energy workforce, clean energy jobs that some exist right now, some don't exist. And one of the things that we've identified in the master planning of solar in Weston Solar Park is being able to, bring, the employment opportunities, locally. In the case of our project that is currently producing power, the Aquamarine Solar Project, we have just within the period of time that that project was constructed, 307 workers from IBEW came from Kings County, from communities like Hanford, Armona, Avenal, Corcoran, Layton, Lemoore, and then we have 40% of the overall workforce coming from Fresno, and then 10% from Tulare, and 4.5% from Madera. And that really demonstrates the amount of employment opportunities, for individuals that, number of these people, were, these workers were newly, entering into the solar energy space, where, they went from, during COVID, a period of unemployment to, actually, working, on a project that was, in their backyard, that provided them, higher wage, provided them benefits, and as a result, if you continue to kind of create project opportunities, like, as I mentioned, we're starting, the construction of our next phase of projects in the Weston Solar Park. The same workers are moving from the first project to the next project, and there is not this huge gap of time that is going to, cause them, to kind of have to wonder where they're going to, provide, means of support for their families, because, they are, having to wait till another project, is coming online. Or, in the case of, I think, kind of individual project developers that don't have a large enough, pipeline of projects to continuously phase in, you could, be, having to drive, to, other parts of California, because you need to be able to, find that work. And that actually has been, part of the problem in the past. And from a training standpoint, that's really hard to train individuals that are constantly having, to, look for projects, chase projects that are not in their region, that are not locally based, because those are, those are kind of missed opportunities for creating a durable kind of pipeline of training partnerships and workforce prep, outreach and communication, because you're also communicating to, younger and younger individuals about the opportunities that exist when they get out of, high school. Some of them may not even, want to go to college. They may want to just enter into, a trades, apprenticeship program. Those are the types of, I think, outreach opportunities that you can really only do if you are able to create locally, based projects and have a, kind of a durable pipeline of those projects that you can master plan.
Okay. But I could also see the industry, clean energy industry, looking to provide scholarships for high schoolers to also get into the accounting of clean energy, right? And there's a marketing, and there's a lot of other jobs in this industry that could be outreach to high schoolers, and so that they could be informed, aware, and seeking to pursue a career within clean energy. And so my hopes are to work effectively with Dan and also IBEW, so we could get some more Huron folks up in there, because I don't know, we probably have one guy, maybe, I don't know. So that, and also Mendota, San Joaquin, Pardier, these are Orange Cove, these are the poorest cities in the state, and they're all in Fresno County. And that's a big problem for me. being the ag revenue capital of the country, and I guess you could probably say the world, right?
Definitely. So one of the key messages I'm taking away from Dan and Ray's discussion is that if we want to realize local community benefits in terms of employment and real benefits to local economy, we're going to need sort of a queue and an ongoing process of project after project after project in the San Joaquin Valley that simplifies the training, makes it easier for folks who are going to be in that workforce to find consistent work. That's going to require an increase in sort of the pace of adoption and development of projects. And at the same time, if we want to meet state renewable energy goals, we're also going to need to see an increase in the pace of design, development, permitting, and ultimately construction of these projects. So I'd like to move that a little bit back to the state level again and ask Erica, thinking about this, the increase in sort of the pace that we're going to need to meet these goals. You know, these zero carbon energy sources, solar in particular, is going to have a much bigger land footprint than the sort of energy sources that we used to use, or that in the future we will have used to use to power our electrical system. How is the state planning process adapting to that? And where are some opportunities for progress in order to sort of speed up the swiftness of this transition?
Yeah, so to achieve the state's climate and clean energy goals, the state is planning for resources of all scales, from distributed energy resources to large-scale renewable and zero-carbon electricity generation. And you're right, Andrew, large-scale renewable energy generation tends to have a larger land use footprint than some of the other resources. Distributed energy resources are a great example. But large-scale renewable resources are a very important part of the pathway to achieving SB 100 and the state's climate goals. And so we really do have to think about how do we plan for these, given their land area requirements, and for offshore wind, their ocean area requirements. So I think there's a couple of ways that we're thinking about doing that. One, in the last SB 100 report, one of the top recommendations was to think about how to improve our ability to evaluate the land use implications of different pathways to achieving SB 100, or how do you think about the land use trade-offs across different policy pathways to achieving SB 100? So that's something that we will be working on as we gear up for the next report, which is due in 2025, is how do we better analyze and evaluate and bring forward information to the public about the land area requirements, about the potential implications, and about the trade-offs. So that's one way, is through the kinds of studies and plans that we do. I think another connects back to a point that Dan made, which is, you know, strategic planning for future energy resources. You know, strategic planning that considers California's other land use priorities, other economic needs. It plays an important role in terms of how we work across different levels of government, how we collaborate with public participants in bringing forward information early in planning to identify issues or barriers to development, to create early engagement opportunities that can help us understand where there are important land use values that should be considered in energy planning, and to provide transparency in how decisions are made about areas where future system investments are made in anticipation of future renewable energy build out. So it's both in the analysis and study we do, but it's also in the types of planning processes we all collaborate on to explore and address these issues early.
Great. As part of this more integrated master planning, part of getting the pace increased for developing this solar resources is permitting. And so county land use permitting authorities play a role there. I'd like to go back to Lorelei and talk about, you know, clearly, Lorelei, you've talked about some of the opportunities there are for solar to provide benefits for Kern County. What does permitting for projects and transmission look like within the county, and what opportunities are there to help speed up these processes?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but you know, one of the things that your report pointed out is that this is ag land that now is going to either give up their water or they're going to have to lose their water, and they want to find some way to get value out of the land. The Williamson Act land use contracts were useful for years, but we need to help these solar companies monetize solar without having to pay this huge cancellation fee to the state of California. We need to look at the Williamson Act again. If they lose water, they can't grow anything. And therefore, penalizing them means that the property owners can't use their land for solar. You know, Dan could probably speak for hours and hours about the finances of solar and how we add mitigation for biology, and then the local government adds something, and then they have dust control. You know, it goes on. And then at the very end, there's this little tiny piece of profit. And so even though you want to invest in California, we have the California Environmental Quality Act. And I want to be very clear with everyone, there are no exemptions for solar. There's no California Environmental Quality Act. I have done 200 environmental impact reports in order to facilitate all of the solar and wind that we've done. And we're proud of that. We haven't cut any corners. We haven't sacrificed any communities. But at the end of the day, there's a process you have to go through. So if we can take away a few of these barriers, right? Let's fix the Williamson Act cancellation issue. If you lose water, why should you have to pay? Let's look at the monetization for local governments. Let's work with our solar partners on the solar tax exclusion on commercial scale solar, that they should be paying the same kinds of property taxes on their equipment that the ag people do. Let's all work together. Those are the types of things that can streamline and make local governments embrace. If the mayor of Huron can stand up and say, I'm getting $2 million a year more in property taxes from this land, the community is going to get excited, because it's not just jobs, it's those revenues. So this is our moment. When it comes to transmission, you know, I'm not saying anything that no one knows. We're 15 years behind on upgrading our transmission. We need to shorten that process. The CPUC needs to get to work to figure out how to shorten the process of planning transmission. And we do need to put transmission into lands like these. Don't put it into wilderness. Don't put it into areas where somebody shows up and says, I'd like to do solar there, if it happens to be in great habitat. Let's try and all work together, as Erica mentions, with these land use screenings, so that the transmission goes where we need it to go, rather than kind of a reactive, a developer comes forward, says, I'd like to put a project there. That is not the way to do transmission planning. The last two transmission, Ready 2.0, has gone to local government. And local governments, we need to work with our people, with our constituents, with our communities, and say, I know you don't like transmission lines, but this is what it's going to take to clean up our air. And we need to be honest with them that adding another 100 feet to a transmission corridor could actually provide enough new transmission that we can achieve these goals. And we can't put everything underground. We need to be honest with our communities. It just doesn't work from an engineering standpoint, and it doesn't work financially. So I think that's where we're at. We have to be straight about what the benefits are. We have to be straight about what the costs are. But I still am advocating for the 4 million people in the Central Valley and the 1 million people in Kern County. Do not leave us behind while you are pursuing your goals. That's our message from a local standpoint.
It looks like, Dan, did you have a quick comment on that?
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree with Lorelei. I just want to just comment only in support of what she said regarding the importance of the political kind of leaders in California, not forgetting the opportunities for not only investment, but also leadership to bring the focus of transmission planning that needs to occur to least regrets areas like the San Joaquin, because if you can't identify the areas that need the resources, the infrastructure, like the San Joaquin, then there are no areas that are least regrets, because you have an overlapping, set of policy goals in the San Joaquin that are driving this transformation, this transition from the kind of economy that we have been, accustomed to the economy of the future that will coexist with farming and agriculture, but with clean energy and clean industries, that we haven't even envisioned yet, but will be producing the types of resources that are going to be coming from the generation that is locally produced, and the workers that are locally trained, and all of that is such an opportunity for the political leadership to kind of latch onto that. I think reports like PPIC just are incredibly important, and that's what I wanted to just kind of highlight.
Great. So at this point, we're almost to audience Q&A. So I want to take a moment to remind the audience that you can submit questions at the email address on your screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. If you do so, please try to remember to include your name and organization, and we will mention that if we can.
So Andrew, we got a couple of minutes, and I just wanted to share that after 18 years, what are we going to do? Right. So we got to make sure that we identify the resources to bring them back. And early on, we got to set up the STEMs at the schools. We got to encourage the kids through scholarships to get into the renewable technology, clean energy industry, internships, fellowships, careers and trades and professionals, manufacturing. Manufacturing is critical for a lot of our communities. What can we manufacture that is relative to the clean energy, renewable technology sector, right? I know we need that. Our lettuce season is gone. Over 8,000 jobs in 2 seasons a year. Huge impact on local economy, right? And we need equity. The demographics of the state are not reflective in the industry, are not reflective in the agencies, are not reflective in the environmental entities.
So Ray, excellent point about needing to create like sort of a broad base for employment in the new energy economy in the Valley. Something that we touched on very, very briefly earlier was the need for sort of an improved transportation opportunities or transportation system to help folks in the Valley not only be able to get between home and workforce training, but also in the future, home and project sites, home and work. I know that's something that you've been involved in. Can you talk about that very briefly?
Yeah, we've been working on mobility and connectivity. We're the pioneers. We started the first electric vehicle rural ride sharing program in the country. We've continued to manage it. We've operated it for 4 years now, and we're a critical resource, an essential resource for farm worker families to ensure a healthy community, because you cannot have a strong economy without a healthy community.
Excellent. So we are now at the point in our agenda where we'll go to audience Q&A. I've got a couple questions lined up here. The first is from Savannah Hunter of UC Berkeley. She asks, previous solar development projects have led to construction workers. Oh, and I forgot, I'm gonna invite Annabelle Rosser back onto the panel for this Q&A session. Previous solar development projects have led to construction workers and others being exposed to and infected with the fungus that causes valley fever. to what extent are valley fever mitigation strategies part of the planning process? So I think I'd like to kick this first to Dan, and also highlight, in addition to the question, this is one of those topics that we covered in the report in terms of what has the solar industry sort of learned in different environments in terms of how to manage air quality impacts. But specifically here, we're talking about valley exposure to the fungus that causes valley fever. Dan, can you comment on this?
This is actually not, to be honest with you, kind of a subject that I'm familiar with. We haven't really had an issue in the projects we've been building in the Westland Solar Park. I maybe think Lorelei might be able to comment on this a little bit more than I.
Okay.
Well, she noted in the chat that she's a valley fever survivor or someone.
Oh, that's me.
That's you.
Ray.
That's you, Ray.
Me and a lot of my relatives here
That's
in
right. We
the
all
west
are.
side of the valley.
Yeah, I have the scars too. So we take this very, very seriously, of course, in Kern. Once again, we do environmental impact reports. For people who aren't familiar in the valley, the desert has valley fever. In fact, valley fever in the Antelope Valley was discovered when they were building the shuttle, and they thought everybody had tuberculosis back in the 80s, and it turned out to be valley fever scars. So valley fever is everywhere in Kern. We, first of all, do a robust educational process through our EIRs so that people understand, what it means, how it works. There are some issues that you need to have more rain. The spores need rain to grow. So during a drought, they actually go somewhat dormant there, right? We are the focus here in Kern County of valley fever research and other sorts of things. So we have a whole suite of valley fever mitigations, including, respirators, handouts. It doesn't help necessarily the workers, but we require the developers to pay for a public service billboards through the public health so that the public understands. But most of all, we are very, very, probably over-regulating our dust control. We do not have dust from our 157,000 acres, and we are very, very clear about that. But most valley fever, if you've been here, you've been exposed. A lot of the valley fever on solar projects, we actually have done a long-term study of our solar projects. We have not shown that. The solar project where that happened was in Nevada. It was actually on the Nevada-California border, where they did no outreach at all. We do make the solar developers provide respirators and others. So we have a whole long suite of valley fever. It's a serious issue, and we take it very seriously.
If I may add, as a valley fever survivor, I think PM mitigation is critical.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how much dust is created. Well, I haven't seen really dust created when they're installing solar. I see it when they're tilling, with the huge clouds and going on miles and miles, and that's a problem. As long as the particulates are not getting into your airstream, then you're preventing it. Whether it has it or not, PM mitigation. I actually don't think that that we're over enforcing it. I think it's critical because if you prevent one person from getting it, then you're preventing a lot of money lost via healthcare, right? And so yeah, PM mitigation is critical. And as far as I can tell, it's not in solar, but there's a lot of areas where there's nothing being grown. We have 3,000 acres north of Huron, where there's a lot of dust, and you leave your door open, you're gonna get a lot of dust in your home. We need to make sure that we have greenery. If these areas are areas that have been traditionally, wildlands, then we need to empower those wildlands. North of Huron, we got 3,000 acres under the Bureau of Reclamation that are overwhelmed with invasive species when they could have native species, making sure that the PM mitigation is occurring in a very effective manner. So and it would be something really positive for our community, because then that would provide some green space. It'll be carbon sequestration, and it'll really empower underground water recharge. So there's a lot of other solutions that could happen that could hit the economy, the planet, the pocket, and the public health. This
has been a great topic to touch on, in part because I'll just mention right now that earlier in July, we at PPIC here in the Water Policy Center released another report that was focused more broadly on this issue of potential air quality impacts of taking these lands out of production over the next 2 decades, with important findings for, what happens if you take that land out of agriculture and don't manage it for air quality. What are the most cost-effective ways for managing it for air quality, and other related questions. So to the extent folks are more interested in potential air quality impacts, I definitely recommend taking a look at that report, which can be found on our website. Going to the next audience question, we have Rick Iger of Provost and Pritchard from Kern County. And Rick asks, Lorelei specifically, could you give examples of carbon capture and sequestration projects? I know this is something that you've been proposing to couple with solar power development. So can you talk about that a little bit more, just briefly?
I'll just take a minute. So we're processing the first conditional use permits and environmental impact reports. I have 2 projects that have been deemed complete, and I have a 3rd project. Altogether, it would be 48 million tons of storage. But the important part here is we're going to go through an environmental impact report. We're going to go through a process. We expect the first EIR for the first project, which covers 4,000 acres on the surface, and then the underground pore space for storing carbon for 100 years. We expect that to be circulating probably by February of 2023. So we look forward to everyone. We look forward to everyone, giving us their feedback. Then you couple that with projects like direct air capture that we're working on. Those need solar. They need thousands of acres of solar. We're working with companies. Right now, I think I have a 1,000 megawatt project on this kind of monetized, used to be farmland, lost water, wants to make money off of it. I think I have a 1,000 acre project, 1,000 megawatt project, and I have another project, and they are not clear how to get it out of the valley. So this is an interim use where we can actually, that's why I started calling it value-added solar, which we already have. Most of our processing plants in the valley are run through distributed generation solar. Grimway, 8 megawatts of solar for their organic carrots. We already have that, but we need to look at this new clean energy industry. Now, I know this is in conflict with, people may want to use this for habitat. We're also working on a very large NCCP to save the best habitat in the valley. So we're going to have all the pieces put together, and we're hoping that this is an example, along with battery storage and long-term storage, that other counties in the Central Valley can replicate for clean energy projects. Green hydrogen, biomass, green biomass. There are all these other areas in the valley where we could couple that with solar.
Excellent, thank you. Going to the next audience question, Jim Kramer of Kramer Consulting asks, is the least conflict solar map helping guide development to the right places? And if so, how is it helping? So to give a little context for this, if I'm understanding correctly, there was a study out of UC Berkeley, which we mentioned in our report, that sort of identified where are lands within the San Joaquin Valley that would be least conflict in terms of, for solar development, in terms of conflict with conservation goals, potential conflict with agricultural lands, that really mapped out where might it make sense to build solar. In addition to that, as we mentioned in the report, there is another set of work out of the Nature Conservancy highlighting where there's solar potential and where that might also be in conflict with conservation goals, and basically building on that analysis, but including the idea that we can build on more ag land than was originally envisioned in that least conflict solar project out of Berkeley. So I'd like to turn this over to maybe Erica, go ahead, Erica, to comment on how these efforts are helping plan.
So the results of the stakeholder-led least conflict planning process for identifying lands for solar PV completed in around 2016 has been used by the energy agencies in past statewide land use screens for transmission planning. So that information has fed into looking at where there is solar resource potential across the San Joaquin Valley and across the state. And it is one of the data sources, one of the data sets that we considered when we looked at this year, how might we need to update the information we're using related to biodiversity and habitat and croplands in updating the information for statewide land use screening for long-term energy planning moving forward.
Excellent. And I'll note that some of the information, we got another siren. Some of the information from those reports were something that we used for some quantitative analysis in our report that we're talking about today, led by Annabelle. So if you're interested in more numbers on what kinds of lands might be available, suitable for solar and waste conflict, please take a look at the report. We do have just 5 minutes left in the program, so I want to give everybody on the panel a chance to do one last sort of quick lightning round comment focused on looking forward at the policy synergy that lies before us in terms of needing to meet renewable energy goals by 2040, 2045, and then having land coming out of production on the scale that we're talking about by 2040. What are your key areas for progress and improvement for realizing success here? And I guess I'll start with Rey, and then we can move through the other panelists. So just very quickly, 30 seconds each.
All right, and working effectively with solar, Golden State Clean Energy, IBEW, we hope we could create a workforce and education resource center in the community, something that will be the bridge and the pathway so that folks can learn of what's coming up in terms of opportunities and dive into it, scholarships for the students, and start working with the school district to develop a STEM, if not a charter school for STEM, whatever needs to happen, because we got to think about this in 7 generations. If in 18 years we're done with the solar farms, what's next? What's next should be started up early. It should start now. And I'd like to, recognize that with Dan and IBW, I think we can make that happen. We got to be innovative. We got to work hard and just make it real.
Excellent. So Dan, do you want to build on that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think this is, really, ground zero for California's ability to meet its clean energy goals in a durable manner, because it cannot be on the backs, as Mayor León is saying, and Lorelei has echoed. It cannot be on the backs of the displacement of workers in the Central Valley. And that it can be an actually just transition that's created if it's done locally, if it's supported politically at the state level. And that's really, I think, in my opinion, the focus needs to be on the political support necessary to invest in the planning of infrastructure towards really what is the development of 30,000 potential megawatts over the next 20 years of renewable clean energy technology and resources that'll drive manufacturing and assembly and fabrication and R&D, into the Central Valley that'll then, be supporting, our institutes of higher education, our workforce development pipelines, and recruitment and outreach, to the next generation of, Central Valley, workers, because it can't be business as usual where Central Valley, sends 40% of its workforce on a daily basis outside, to work in the Bay Area, to work in Northern California, that, is going to create, a displacement of economic opportunity. It needs,
Okay.
We have enough investment opportunity in the Central Valley.
I gotta cut you off there, Dan. But I really like that point about durability. Lorelei, can you really quick last thought?
This is really hard work, and we need everyone, and there are hard choices ahead, but we can do this faster than 15 years. So
Okay.
we just need to get to work and have everybody at the table.
Perfect. And final thought, Erica?
a focus on how we collaborate to better integrate the local land use planning and the statewide electricity planning, especially for long lead time infrastructure investments.
Excellent. Well, we've reached the end of our program. I'd like to thank, first of all, Katie for the great introduction to the event today, Annabelle for her presentation, all of the panelists for being with us, and of course, our funders one last time. I'd also like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. If you did pre-register for the event today, you're going to receive a survey, and we would really appreciate it if you could fill it out. It really helps us planning for future events. And one final reminder, the PPIC Water Policy Center is going to be holding its Fall Water Policy Conference on November 18th in Sacramento. You can register for that event on our website. Please take a look. And with that, I'll say thank you, stay safe, and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Adios.